Hello, Merry Meet. This is Lady Tehila from the Coven of the Open Mind, and you're watching Wicca and Witchcraft 101. Hail and welcome. The topic this time is still Invocation, is the second half of Chapter 7, and we will be covering specifically communion versus prayer. How are those different or similar, and used with regard to invocation magic, and versus possession, which we talked about last time as a consequence of a binding gone wrong, but this time we'll talk about it as something you might do deliberately. We'll talk about what it means to invoke the elements, the spirits, to be possessed by a spirit, what it means to invoke deity, and to draw down the moon, which is a type of deity possession. So that's the topic this time. Invocation, possession that is done deliberately and in a controlled way. Let's get started. Okay, so communion, as we've talked about in the past, it's the same concept here with invocation. It's like seeing with your eyes, but not with your hands, not touching it with your hands, right? Like that old expression. See with your eyes, not with your hands. Okay, well, this is like that, like seeing from a distance, like sympathy. So seeing that another person is having feelings and maybe caring about it to some extent, but not experiencing feelings of your own as a result of what they're feeling or experiencing their feelings. You're just seeing them have feelings from a distance. That's sympathy. That's what we're talking about when we talk about communion, but not just with feelings, now with any kind of sensation, with any kind of energy. So communion is used to bring familiarity with energy. It's used to allow you to know that energy intimately well so that you can make use of it later on or invoke it and allow it to transform you in some way. You have to be very sure that whatever energy you invoke is going to interact with your energy in a way that is constructive and positive and ordered, right? So just like we talked about in the last lecture. So don't have to go over that again. That's communion. Exactly the same concept that we used for spell work, that we're using in the last lecture. Pretty straightforward. So what is the difference between communion and prayer? Well, in a sense, prayer is kind of like a reverse communion, or it's a communion in both directions, where a person first gets a sense for what force they're working with and understands that deity, and usually then you would honor that deity. So there's a process to develop like a good prayer, right? A good prayer is one that seeks alignment between you and the divinity and the higher plane. So a good prayer is going to involve first acknowledging the force that you're working with, proving I've communed with you and I know what to say or do or embody or what to offer you that associates with this energy, that associates with your preferences, if you will. I understand this archetypal energy extremely well, in other words, and I can see it echoed throughout the physical world and the world that we live in. So you first acknowledge that force, prove you know it well, honor it, then you can state what it is that you'd like to request, if there's any blessings that you're seeking, if you have some kind of desire or will that some kind of desire that you wish to see done, but there's not really any will behind it. You don't know how you want it to be done. You just know that it's something you need. For instance, I need to pay my bills, right? You don't know how you're going to do it or where the money's going to come from, but you know that you need to. Okay, that would be something that you could pray for, that you could wish for, in a sense, but it's a little stronger than just a wish. You're not wishing on a star. You're not, working with the Fae. You're working with the force that is order. So that's one reason why it's stronger. And the other reason is because of the communion step, taking the time to understand the energy you're working with so that you're aligned already and you know that what you're requesting of that energy is something that energy would be willing to give you, if you are kind, and you continue to live in ordered existence, really, which is what divinity wants from you. So you're not making a bargain when you wish to divinity, when you pray, because your end of the deal is exclusively, I will embody order as much as possible in my life, and work with you often so that I can live an ordered, disciplined existence, right? So that's all that deity wants. There's no like bargain like there would be with the Fae as well. So a prayer is like a wish, but it's more powerful because it involves alignment, communion with divinity, living an ordered existence, and all of that sort of stuff. So it's common to see people praying during rituals, daily, as needed. Very common. Prayer is like the lowest form of working with divinity. It's not a ritual. You're not bringing that divine energy into yourself so it can make some change. You're not in an altered state of mind or ritual trance. You may be meditative. You may be doing some kind of existential or effortless presence meditation, where you're just taking in a space and being like, wow, it's so beautiful. It's so ordered. I feel divinity in this space. That is, for example, the kind of mindset that someone might find themselves in when they speak a prayer. But they could also bring that mindset about because of whatever's going on around them, and they need that mind space, and then they pray. So prayer can also drive a more meditative life cycle when it's used correctly, as a way to just deal with whatever's going on in the moment. But the prayers have to be good prayers. You can't just be like, something passive aggressive out loud that's causing disorder. Like, it has to be a good prayer if it's going to actually bring order into your life. It has to be appropriate for the moment. It has to be, if you speak it aloud, it has to be appropriate that you speak it aloud. It has to be actually positive, actually ordered, not an expression of will or intent, not an emotional experience, just I pray for patience in this moment. Blessed be, I love my daughter and I pray for patience. Or, this daughter you have created is perfect and beautiful, just like you, goddess. Please give me the patience to see that even now. Blessed be. That is a good prayer. Like, that is something that if you took the time to think in that way every time you were faced with a challenge, you would be a more disciplined person who acted deliberately in a way that was ordered and in line with divinity, right? You'd be humble and patient and all the things that you're supposed to be. So that is one way that people will work with divinity, and some may never invoke it in the ways that we're going to go on to describe. They may just pray, and that's the difference between communion and prayer. They're kind of like the same, but one is two-way, where divinity is also getting a sense for what you want and will see if they can make that happen or not, right? It's not changing divinity on some fundamental level. It's just, it's not willful. It's just, this is kind of what I want. Do you think that we could make this happen? Yeah. Now that's versus possession. Possession is a state of mind that occurs once the energy that you've communed with is summoned in sufficient quantities that it can overwhelm the ego and kind of push the ego out of awareness to be replaced by another awareness. It has to be an awareness that is strong enough to possess the whole body, to take over that cognitive vessel, so that the ego is kind of on standby and is not like influencing at all what that person is doing anymore. They are acting based on a desire that is not their own. So that is possession, and that involves invoking the energy into the self. To commune with an energy, you may invoke it. You may raise that energy in that space, or attract the energy to the space, or somehow, amplify the energy that's already there so that you can commune with it or pray better, right? To be better aligned with divinity, you could invoke energy into a space. If you invoke the energy into a space, you can still interact with it from a distance. It doesn't directly influence you. It doesn't take control over you. If you invoke the energy into yourself, which usually you'll invoke it into the space first in sufficient quantity, you'll raise it up and then bring it into yourself, And that's when you can achieve this possession state of mind, which is more advanced. You may not do it at all as an acolyte, but it definitely is something that people do, and that is decidedly Wiccan, and you'll see it in Wiccan rituals, and often something that is done by leaders, or you'll see seances, right? You'll see spirit possession commonly all around the occult world. So that's why we talk about it in the beginner course, even though you may not be attempting to do this kind of like full invoking it into yourself in this way yet. There are other kinds of invoking the energy into yourself besides possession, and we'll talk about those and the differences between them in this lecture. As a deliberate technique, possession is positive. It's a good thing. You retain the ability to come out of it at any time. You have shields within yourself to shield your ego, that you set it aside, like, so it's untouched by the experience. It just kind of comes back into you after the other awareness leaves. And you can end the session anytime because it's deliberate, it's controlled. That's what makes it like a tool and not a side effect in this case. It's very dangerous, like we said. Gotta use proper shielding and all this stuff, but it is a technique you see often for seances and drawing down the moon. When you invoke the elements, as we've discussed previously, if you invoke the elements into your space by using the summoning pentagrams and calling the quarters, when you're invoking the elements into your space one by one or all together, it brings a sense of timelessness to that space, right? It elevates the space, makes you feel like you're in the world between worlds. You're on the level of the fundamental forces. When you invoke the elements into yourself, it gives you a magnification of the qualities of life that you already possessed that are found within your body, that make up you, but the physical component of you most of all. When you bring the elements in individually or separately, you invoke them into yourself, which you can do with gestures, the gestures I gave you last time, plus the meditation, right? You can bring the energy into yourself and feel like you're on fire. You are fire. And that will give you vitality. It'll make you feel like you can go and go and go and never stop going for a time until you burn out, and then you're exhausted, and then you have to catch up on sleep or whatever. You have to ground. If you do it with earth, it'll give you strength, physical strength to pick things up, carry things. It can help fight fatigue and exhaustion. But again, you have the period where it wears off, right? And then you have intuition. So your ability to be aware of what's going on around you, your ability to use what you're seeing and what you're aware of to make good choices. So that whole intuition, like being informed about what's going on in the world so that you can be safe and be your best self, that's what you gain when you invoke water. And for air, it's reason, it's the ability to think better, to come to the right conclusions, problem solve. So it's the physical side of the parts of the body that make up the mind when it comes to water and air, but not just the mind, also the nervous system, the whole body as a machine has a capability for transcendent awareness. It's just that the awareness is different because you perceive of it in different ways. So we perceive of it like we're a mind with a body, but in reality, you are your body. Your mind and body are one thing. So we're talking about the physical side of it. We're talking about how do thoughts actually happen? Are you forming connections in your brain? Are you problem solving well? Are you learning on the fly because your brain is functioning well and it's not, inflamed or having other issues, right? So when you invoke air, you have a healthier physical infrastructure. You have a healthier biology, physiology on which the less physical components of these two higher elements can play out, right? The actual like philosophy and transcendent part. So this is invoking the elements is a way of bringing physical wellness and heightened physical capability. And then you could also invoke the elements all as one, as spirit active, which many times people will envision the pentagram and stand like in a pentagram pose when they do it. And they will bring that spirit active into themselves as a whole. And that brings empowerment. It brings grace. It makes you feel very in control of yourself and very magical. And there's often guided meditations that step you through bringing them each in one at a time and then all together. So that's another common way to invoke the elements. You don't do it all the time. It's not a staple of Wiccan ritual to invoke the elements into the self. But it is something that is beneficial and relatively safe because you work with the elements all the time, so you'll recognize that energy readily. You can practice bringing energy into yourself and allowing it to transform you and change the way you physically feel. And that helps prepare you to be ready to do it with divinity or other energies, spirit energy, etc. So invoking the elements is a great way to get started here. Give it a try. So we talk about timeless awareness a lot. I want to spend some time on what it means to be timeless, to be unaware of the passage of time. That's what we mean when we say that someone is timeless or in a state of timelessness or experiencing timelessness. They are unaware of the passage of time in that state of mind. So in life, this happens when all of life is taken to be one interconnected process over all of space-time, right? So you integrate all the way up and you're in like 6 dimensions probably, right? That's how many are governing this reality. Depends on how you look at it, but it could go all the way up to 9, I guess. But the metaphysics aside, you take all of space-time, you treat it like one interconnected process. That is outside of the passage of time. In that view, time is a probability curve. It's a superposition of potential moments. It's just memory. And the present moment is determined. It's deterministic. It's the wave functions collapse and you're in a single state and you're having a moment. And then once the moment is past, it's a memory. And the moments in the future are memories. It's all the same. It's just easier to remember the past than the future because the future has higher probabilities about what will actually come to pass. It's easier to look into the past and see evidence of what has existed before. It's more certain what has come to pass than what will come to pass. And that's why it's easier to have a realistic depiction and an informed understanding of the past. And that's why people see ghosts as memories of the past and why they'll go into an old home and see memories of those who used to live there. That's easier for people to do than for them to go in a space and see the future of that space and what it'll look like when people live there one day. But it's all the same energy. It's all the same. It's a timeless river. It's the collective unconsciousness, which is the opposite of life. Life is like a river of consciousness. Death is the opposite, the river of unconsciousness. 2 sides of one river, perhaps, is a better analogy. 2 halves of one truth. Ebb and flow, change. Everything is in flux. Everything is a vibration. Everything is energy. That is the one truth, right? We are one interconnected process experiencing itself. So that is a recap of all the metaphysics from last time. If you don't remember what it is and you don't understand what it means to have a timeless awareness by now, it means you don't perceive of the passage of time. You are experiencing the current moment as a memory. You are experiencing all moments as memories, and what comes to you will depend on how you project your ego onto that collective unconsciousness. You are the bridge. You are the 5th spirit, okay? You are the way to understand this vast trove of experience. The only way any of those memories make any amount of sense at all is through the lens of your limited, finite, physical experiences. That's why physical beings exist at all. That's the purpose of life existing the way that it does. So that you can form a personal relationship with something that is abstract and beyond infinite. Otherwise, it has no meaning at all. So that's the point. Okay, that's timelessness. Which is very relevant because now we're talking about spirits. So continuing with the river metaphor. Water drops contain water molecules. The molecules are the individual lifetimes, and the water drop is the soul. Is it a water drop, or is it a set of water molecules? Well, it's both, right? What is a water drop? It's a set of water molecules. Okay. So a person is both this current individual lifetime that they have now, this body and mind as one whole being, and also a transcendent being that lives many lifetimes. But that water drop is also a part of a whole river of water. And some call that the river Styx, right? That's where that comes from. It's called many things, but that's why spirit journeys often involve being on boats on rivers. You go along the river, you pull out any drop of water you want, and you can pull a molecule from that drop and commune with it and understand it and even invoke it into yourself. The whole river is just made of water. When you look at it, you say it's water. The river is made of water. You can't see it as drops until you separate them out into the smallest bits you can put them into. You can't see them as molecules until you have them as drops. And this is why you are not possessed, generally speaking, by all of death energy at once. You don't generally seek possession by all of death energy. You usually are possessed by a single memory, a single lifetime, a single molecule of the water in the river. When you concentrate that one single molecule enough and you isolate it out from the rest and you concentrate it and give it enough energy that you can really have a relationship with it and then bring it into yourself, that's when you achieve spirit possession. And when that person can act through you and your facial expressions change and the way you speak changes and your mannerisms change and you will seem like another person and speak of things that you have no way of knowing or speak in languages you don't speak, and you'll just be a different person all of a sudden. That is spirit possession. Now, you don't have to invoke in a way that leads to possession, which we talked about a lot last time, but that's how you achieve it. If you do it deliberately and you can end it at any time, it's perfectly healthy. When you do seances, you set everything up. It's just a ritual. So you can watch the previous lecture on rituals and set up a ritual to the dead where the goal is that you bring that energy into yourself in the way we've just described. But you don't have to work with death energy as molecules. Okay, you don't have to give it energy or concentrate it down or summon it at all. You have to attract the death energy to the space or clear the space of life energy, right? Because remember that those forces are two sides of one coin. So bringing in one clears the other. Well, you could work with it as spirit passive and invoke it in the same way you would spirit active through this elemental lens. And it's something that can be invoked on its own. The entire river of unconsciousness, it's already one with all who live, because your current water molecule, your current lifetime, is just a part of that river, really. And your life is like the sun beats down on this river and the water evaporates up and is just floating above the river. And when the sun goes down, it falls back into the river. Right? That's life. Life is the cycle of rising above death and falling back into it. So all who live must surely die, and death is timeless. So that means that even in life, there's a part of us that is already dead, that is already one with this collective unconsciousness. This timeless force, the river Styx. So if you invoke the entire river into yourself at once and allow it to change you. It will bring you visions of your own past lives. It will bring you knowledge about your soul, about the water drop that contains your molecule. And that's how you do past life regression. You can use it to do divination, not because once you're connected to that collective unconsciousness, you can query for anything you want, really. So if you deliberately get to the right state of mind where you're aware of your own past lives and memory as a whole, you can ask questions and get answers that are transcendent of time, that are more about like what is certainly going to come to pass, as opposed to what could potentially come to pass, though the potential is part of it. When you're using death energy, usually you're going to get one or two very likely outcomes when you're doing divination with death energy. When you do divination with life energy, with spirit passive, you're pulling knowledge from the physical world around you. Then you generally get more different kinds of outcomes and less clarity on which ones are the most likely to occur. So that's the difference in those two energies with regard to divination. You gain truth about the collective unconsciousness through your own life and the lens of your own experiences with memory and living throughout many lifetimes. So it brings wisdom, it brings a unity between objective and subjective truth. It helps you align with the higher planes of existence. There are a lot of good reasons to invoke spirit passive. It can be dangerous because if you don't know what you're doing, it can lead to possession by spirit. If you feed too much energy to a specific molecule, right, you concentrate it too much, it can possess you and you can have changes to yourself that maybe are permanent. If you can't sever that connection, you might need an exorcism. So that's all the stuff we covered in the last one. So go back and watch in the lecture on spirit bindings, because when you pull a single molecule out, you're giving it energy. It's really a form of binding. So what we're talking about here is you've done the binding and then you're going to bring it into yourself. If you do that deliberately, you get possession, seances, it's all good. If you do it and it's not deliberate, that's when you can get the latchings, the issues that we discussed last time. But if you invoke all of that energy as a whole, the chances of you doing that are lower unless you're prone to obsession, unless you're prone to distraction. So that's going to be up to you to decide, can I do a past life regression by myself? Or do I need someone there who can help me to stay on track and keep me focused or get me into the right state of mind? It could be a hypnotist. It could be a dream therapist. It could be a spiritual leader, somebody that is more advanced and that works with this death energy more often, that can get you to the right answers that you seek about your own past lives and your relationship with death, without the risk of you becoming distracted or spending too much energy on a particular aspect of what you're seeing or experiencing in that memory, giving too much energy to a single memory so that it overcomes your will in the present moment. Okay, so when we work with death in Wicca, usually we are not invoking the death energy at all, into ourselves especially. Usually we attract the death energy to a space, which is a form of invocation for many. And for others, the energy is just always there because it's like an altar for the dead or a grove or something designed to have that energy naturally, a grave site. So for some, they have to invoke the death. For others, it's just present. But once the energy is in the space, then witches usually just commune with it. They may summon the spirits, the molecules of water that correspond with their loved ones from past lives, especially on Samhain, one day a year, when everyone's already drab and weary anyway. So it doesn't matter if you're pulling some energy from someone who's currently alive. It doesn't matter if you're tugging on that water drop from multiple directions, right? They're living in one molecule, you tug on another. It doesn't matter, because everyone's drab and tired and weary anyway, and that's why we eat candy. But usually when Wiccans do this, it's just to commune with it, to pray with it, to remember, honor their loved ones, align with them, pray with them, channel divinity with them, and that's it. And then they say goodbye, good night. There's no generation of energy or will or intent. But even if there is a generation of energy, will, or intent, even if there's not, after a ritual where you commune with the dead, you have to ground in a particular way. You have to ground by raising life energy. You have to raise the life energy by moving, exercising, walking barefoot outside, feasting, eating, feeding your body, taking care of your physical needs. You have to do something that demonstrates that you're alive and that you're wanting to be alive. And you have to also move on from the death wholly and not carry those memories with you into life. And for that purpose, many will ring a bell or light incense. Sage or lavender and cleansing incenses are most common. And then you just discipline your mind so that after you're done with the ritual, you just move on. You're not thinking about the dead. You're not dwelling on the dead anymore. You're at peace with it. You're completely in the moment, in living. And then later on in the evening, that's when you can go back and reminisce about everything that happened and talk about the ritual or talk about the loved ones and that sort of thing. But while you ground, you just leave it behind and move back into life. And you never look back. They say if you look back over your shoulders, you walk away from the dead, that the death will follow you, that death will stalk you until it gets you. That's what they say. Don't look back because things can latch on, they can follow you. That's true. What do we offer to the dead? What do we offer to the dead to attract their energy to the space? Food-wise, it will be things that have strong flavors that are spicy or sweet. People will believe cream and creamy things. Cheeses, things that have pungent smells. They believe that attracts the dead because it's the most alive thing you could eat. Like it's the most rigorous on your senses. And then there's some herbs that align with death energy and that grow best in on top of things that are decomposing. And those are things like mugwort, mullein. Myrrh is the resin that aligns with it because it's musky and it's very passive, musky scent. Anything that's passive and musky and has a timeless feel to it will make this list, which is far from comprehensive here. The fungus, that's one that many people don't think about, but fungus attracts death energy, mold, things that grow on decomposition. Items of things that are now departed. So any kind of trinkets or things that have memory inherently within them. Natural spaces, places that have death energy inherently within them include dead or like dry rivers, which are like just the rocks where water used to flow. Abandoned buildings, battlefields and grave sites, groves where people are buried, all common places. Fossils and bones, obviously, representations of death, anything that represents loss and decay, skulls and the like. Feathers are less commonly seen as aligning with death energy and more commonly seen as aligning with the element air, but some align it with death energy because of the angel component, like how angels have feathered wings, that like archetype of death. Blueprints and itineraries and things that represent potential and possibility also align with death energy, and that's one that people never really think about. Anything that represents timeless potential, so not like calendars or schedules so much, because those are measured ways of measuring the passage of time. We're talking about timeless components, so things that are just plans, but they don't have deadlines or set dates. They're just dreams, plans, representations of the possible. Models are one example as well. Those all align with death energy. Blood offerings are not uncommon for death rituals, but we're talking about pricking a finger. We're talking about a few drops of blood. Sometimes you count the drops and there's a certain number for whatever numerological reasons. We're talking about just a little bit of blood, nothing that's like super dangerous, and it's not something that's done every day all the time. It's something that you would do it and draw a sigil of some kind and then leave that on the altar, and then maybe you do it again. Maybe you do it at every new moon if you're a necromancer and you work with the dead often and you have a ritual to the dead. For most Wiccans, it would be like on Samhain, or if you're using death energy to curse someone, which happens like once every decade, probably. So that's what we're talking about. We are not talking about cutting yourself. Talked about it in the previous one. I don't want to have to put another trigger warning on this video, but let me just say, once again, that cutting yourself is a perverse act. It's an act that goes against the nature of the self, of ordered existence to beget order. Okay, it's disregard for life, and that is a perverse thing to do. That is a manifestation of chaos. That is not an offering to the dead. It is an offering to demons who are not even in this chapter because we don't invoke them. So don't do it. There are better ways to channel that chaos. There are better ways to channel perversion into ordered things that will make you feel fulfilled and happy. Okay, there are happier ways to be a perverse person. There's nothing wrong with darkness. There's nothing wrong with feeling the void through your experiences or your memories. People have connections to the void, and that doesn't make someone a bad person who should just do bad things or punish themselves. Doesn't mean that. It does mean that you have to wield chaos, that you have to work more closely with chaos. It happens more and more. We're in an era of chaos between two ages as it happens. So a lot of people are having this trouble today, and there are better ways to channel it than to further the chaos and to lead yourself to catastrophe. So if you're having those problems and you need someone to work with or talk to about it because you're like, how do I work with chaos then, if that's what I need to do to be well and to channel this in a way that is more constructive, just reach out to me, come on our Discord server. I do free counseling and talk to people as much as they need all the time as a spiritual counselor, mediation, all of it. Like, we just help people here find their way to a fulfilling, happy path. Doesn't necessarily mean you're going to work with deities, right? If someone is feeling the need to do this kind of self-destructive habit often, they're probably going to be working with chthonic deities. They're going to be working with death energy. They're going to be working with chaos, and that's okay. Like, we're not going to judge you or tell you don't do it. It's dangerous. Yeah, it's dangerous. That doesn't mean you shouldn't do it. It means that you have to be careful and smart and work with someone who knows what they're doing so that you can be safe and that you can be healthy and that you can find fulfillment on any of the paths that exist. In Wicca, for the vast majority of people that work with death energy, that use blood offerings, it is not self-harm. It is not a form of punishment. It is just a way of seeding some life, of weakening the physical vessel so that death can be present in the space. It's especially common when you're doing a seance and you're trying to invoke the death energy into yourself to give up some blood so that that energy can come into you and you can feel one with the dead and you can feel death inside of yourself, and the ego gets put aside so that you can be a vessel for that death and you can speak the words of that molecule of death aloud for everyone to hear and interact with. And that is how you might see blood offerings used in Wicca, very uncommonly, usually only around Samhain or in the fall, or if someone needs a seance because they really are not at peace with the loss of someone and they have a bad haunting. A seance is like a mediation session between a person and their own memories of a now deceased person. It's really like a form of therapy to do a seance. And spiritual counseling is really just therapy. That's why, if you're seeing someone who's a spiritual counselor, also please make sure that they have your best interest at heart and they're being responsible about what they're advising you to do or not do. It should never be like a for-profit thing. Like, just please keep that in mind. Like, okay, be safe out there, everyone. But okay, so that's what it is to work with the dead in Wicca. And now we can talk about working with divinity, which is probably the most common thing that people in Wicca do. When deity is invoked into a space, it can take any form imaginable. It can be an aspect of deity, which is really a projection of the ego onto this force. Remember how the light in the prism principle, the light goes through the prism and turns into a spectrum of different colors. Those colors only exist because of the prism. Otherwise, the light would just be white. So, in a sense, the color is a function of the prism, right? It belongs to the prism. It's decided by the prism. So that is the analogy, right? So you are the prism. So you project your ego onto divinity, and it takes on a certain color or a certain form, and it acts a certain way that makes it easier for you to relate to it and to interact with it in your own way. That is when you invoke divinity into a space. When you devoke it into yourself, you don't invoke it as an aspect. You may do both of these things in a ritual. You may call an aspect of divinity into the space and then invoke divinity into yourself. But when you invoke the divinity into yourself, it is only exclusively the white light form of divinity. The purest, whitest form gets invoked into yourself. And then if you're aspecting, that's when you would bind your will and intent with that white light coming into yourself. So you're totally aligned with divinity. So you're binding your will and intent and divine will and intent, which are one and the same in that moment. You're binding that to the energy you've invoked into the space, and then you can appear as the deity in question and speak as if you were them. And the reason why we don't invoke that aspect into the self is because it can create a feedback loop. It's a projection of the ego. So if you then invoke it into the ego, it can create a feedback loop that grows the ego out of control. And you can get into like a possessed by deity scenario. If you're latched on by deity, you're having delusions of grandeur. You're having those symptoms that we talked about in the lecture on evocation part 2, right? On evoking divinity. So you can run into those side effects even while invoking divinity if you're invoking an aspect of divinity, which you're not supposed to do. That's technically going to result in some kind of binding. It's going to be like a feedback loop that results in you binding yourself in some perverse way, right? It could only result in disorder. It could only result in perversion because it's not deliberate. So when you're bringing the energy into yourself, it should be white, pure, divine light, untainted by your own ego. It's just divinity. Why would you do it? Why do you invoke the divinity into yourself and not just into your space so that you could pray or, then do magic that is influenced by that divine energy with your, you could commune and align with that energy better if it's in your space and then do magic, which is the most common way divinity gets used in Wicca. But you could invoke the divinity into yourself as well if you don't have some purpose in mind for why you're doing it. You just want a powerful, transformative experience. And you control what kind of transformative experience you're going to have by invoking the right aspect of deity into the circle, by using the right kind of divine energy. And you get the attitude and the mood of the space set correctly, and that puts your headspace in the right place to receive divinity. And then you pull divine light down into your mind, directly down like a lightning rod from divinity into yourself, and the whatever energy you've invoked, whatever tone you've set for yourself, can sort of influences how that divinity manifests its change. So just like when you're doing chaos magic, when you're invoking divinity, you are letting your ego in the state that it's in, that you've gotten it into, direct the change, and you're using non-thinking and inaction. Because remember, deity is like a form of chaos, right? It's the other side of disorder, order. It's chaos. So you can only successfully invoke divinity with non-thinking and inaction. I have no plans on what to change or how to act. I have no will or intent for this energy. I just am seeking a transformation, and I have faith in this energy, in this divinity that I recognize, in this brand of higher order. I have faith in myself. You have complete faith. That is how you practice order. That is how you express order. And that's why you know that any change that happens to you will be an ordered change that will further order in your life. That's all you can know about it. Otherwise, it wouldn't be a necessarily ordered change. It wouldn't necessarily be positive. What makes it positive is the faith, is the belief that what will be, and I will rise to the occasion because I have faith in myself and in God, right? In the circumstances I can't control, I have faith. In the circumstances I can, I have faith that I will rise above and do what needs to be done, no matter what the circumstances are. But maybe I would like them to be good circumstances if you would. Thank you so much, right? That's how you work with divinity. That's how you pray. It's like, Okay, I know that I can't influence you, but if I bring you into my life and bring you into myself, you will influence me so that I can be the best version of myself and rise above whatever it is that you send for me. All I want from this interaction is to have a positive relationship with ordered existence, with order. Okay? That is how you invoke divinity, why you invoke divinity. And it's not really a particularly dangerous thing to do, as long as you're sure that the energy is what it is, that it's actually a divine energy that is ordered, that brings positive change. You're sure what the energy is, and you're shielded so that nothing outside, nothing unknowable can influence you. Then you can allow the unknowable to influence you, because it's a particular strain of it that's being guided into you by a very meticulous process that is all governed by your unthinkable parts, by the parts of you that just are, by being itself, right? That is what makes it not an unsafe thing to do. But that's why it's also an advanced technique, because you have to have all the circumstances totally right, and you have to know what you're doing. And then it's a very powerful, transformative experience. So when you draw down the moon, when we call it drawing down the moon, it's really a form of possession, and you could be possessed by any kind of divinity. There are symbols in the physical world that are believed to inherently embody divinity because they are life-giving in their physical nature. The sun is one, the earth, the rain, the moon, and some view it as being in food or drink as well, like in the Christian notion of like the flesh and blood of Christ. So when you draw down the moon, you're using a physical object as a representation of divine energy, and you're specifically picking something that is inherently life-giving and furthering of order, and that's what makes it a representation of divinity. So it's the moon, but it could be any thing that fits that bill, as long as it's not an archetype, right? So you're not working with Tote as a moon deity. You're not working with Diana. You're not invoking Tote or Diana into yourself. You may into your space, but when you invoke it into yourself, it's the Lady of the Moon, the Lord of the Sun, right? The Lady of the Hunt, or the Lord of the Hunt. You're invoking a less particularly focused archetype. It's not a manifestation of your subjective truth. It's a manifestation of objective truth. The hunt is an experience that all things that are alive must do to survive. All things need light from the moon, light from the sun, right? These are parts of nature, that parts of the collective experience of life. And that's why they're representations of divinity and not the elements, though they do have elemental alignments as well, but that's a projection, right? The elemental alignments as a projection. The truth that is represented by the inherently life-giving parts of physical nature, that truth is not a projection. That's an objective truth. That's something every living thing experiences in the same way. So you can draw down that energy into yourself, and it makes it easier to be possessed than it would if you were drawing down the all consciousness. You don't invoke like God the all-conscious. You don't invoke, because honestly, many people, even their perception of God the all-conscious is as an archetype, as a father archetype. It's not even the true all-conscious, which is beyond madness. Like, it's beyond reality. It's mad, okay? So you don't usually invoke that. Instead, you invoke the light side only, the life-giving components, the ones that bring order. So that's why we use representations of divinity found within nature as a way to concentrate our focus, so that we are pulling down all of divinity as white light, but not the other side, not the dark side of chaos, just the white side. So when you bring that energy down very strongly into the self, then it can push the self out, just like with spirit possession. And if you don't carefully push the self out in a deliberate, controlled way, it can destroy the self, and it can be dangerous to invoke divinity, which is why only leaders learn how to do this and do this technique. And nobody else in the circle does it but the leader, because it's an advanced technique. But usually that's why you use words of power, things that are familiar that you can do without thinking in that state of mind. It's a focal point for divinity. It is not a projection because it's happening within the self. It's almost like divinity is projecting onto you, right? But you have to bring it down into yourself first because it would have no reason to desire that otherwise. So it's again, it's like that two-way street. But now instead of with prayer, we're talking about with possession. We're talking about true alignment with transcendent awareness. But then you give it something like the charge of the goddess, right? And that is a focal point. That's something that it can, that awareness can do within your body that is safe and comfortable for you and won't press your capabilities too far or scare anyone or have any undesirable effect because it's familiar, it's ordered, right? So that is the point of the words of power that you use when you're drawing down the moon. That focal point is really key to it being a happy, successful experience that doesn't harm you in the process or anybody present. When you're using aspecting, sometimes possession is also something that occurs. And it's because you have to invoke the amount of energy in yourself to counterbalance the evocation, right? As we discussed previously. When that happens and you're possessed, again, it's by white light, just pure divinity as a whole. And that's why the behaviors that people might wind up doing are mad. Okay, they're bizarre. They don't make a lot of sense, but they are expressions of life and order. So things like dancing, singing, speaking in tongues, acting like animals, jumping around, things like that, right? If they're also aspecting, then those actions will take on the form of things that align with that deity. So like I aspected Artemis once for an initiation, and I leapt across the room as if I was going to stab someone with a spear. And startled them a little bit. But that was part of the challenge, right? So deity was challenging them. How much do they flinch in the face of the unknowable challenge, the unknowable battle? You know, and they didn't flinch too much. It was satisfactory, right? But I don't even recall that because I was in a state of possession as well as binding and aspecting for the purpose of divinity in that moment, to make sure that this person was ready to be a representative of divinity themselves, right? That's a divine purpose. So that's an example of how you might use it in Wicca and what it looks like. If it's not drawing down the moon, it may still be a possession of some of the white light itself, but geared through the lens of the ego in terms of how it manifests into an actual experience external to the self invoking it. Like inside myself, it's just divinity and there's no awareness of anything else. Outside myself, there's awareness of an aspect of divinity, right? And that's why I have no memory of it. But everyone else has that because everyone else is still themselves interacting with this. That's the point of it. So that's how you draw down the moon. As you start to work with this stuff, please remember that divinity is the light side of chaos. We are using the light side only. You can use the light side, that's not an aspect. It's just the flow to the ebb, right? It's just the flow of divinity, not the ebb. The ebb is the disorder, is the demons. We're not invoking those. We're not working with those. Only the light side. When you're working with divinity, it should feel like love and light. It should feel like a warm embrace. It should feel like pureness, wholeness, happy, peaceful bliss, empowerment. You should feel empowered to act, not like you are a slave to some strict deity who is making you do this or that so that you can serve them well. No, that's not how deity works. And now you can see the corruption of the institutions that have said otherwise. If you are to have a relationship with divinity, it has to be deliberate, it has to be something that is personal to you, that takes the objective truth and manifests it in a way that you can understand it in your own subjective reality. If you don't have that connection, if you're not aligned with deity, then you don't know if you're really working with order or not. You don't know what this force is or what it's doing to you. You have to be in control of your spirituality no matter what religious path you are on. You have to have a personal relationship with divinity. You have to feel divinity in your rituals. You have to feel order. You have to feel rejuvenated and energized not exhausted when you walk away from the ceremony, the ritual, the activity that you're participating in. If you're truly working with order, you are energized, revitalized, everyone around you is as well. You are all aligned, you are at peace with outside things you can't control, objective truth. You are at peace with reality. You're not convinced of things that are not true of your own, that are not true of objective reality, that are just true for you. You're not convinced that those are objective truths, right? If you're working with divinity correctly and safely, and it is in fact divinity, you are experiencing an ordered existence and you're on an ordered path. So for many people, in order to do the advanced techniques safely, they work with the same archetypes of divinity again and again. They work with the same energies so that they are sure of what they are and they're familiar before they do the advanced techniques with them. And they call those patron deities. For the female, some use patroness and some use matron, though some believe that matron is like a sexist, outdated term. Many will just call them patrons regardless of the gender of the deities. And you don't really find them. It's more like they find you. But, keep in mind that these are timeless. They're beyond time. They're beyond reality. The beings that are deities have no real desire to have a relationship with you in the sense of our kind of desire, an experience over time. So while it feels like they select you, you also have to do some effort and make an effort to have a relationship with them. So that means working with divinity in a nameless, formless force until the aspects are clear to you. You have to start forming that relationship, start projecting yourself onto divinity and see what form it takes for you. And that is how you find your aspects that you're meant to work with, that you vibe with the best. That's how you form the bridge. You start building from your own side, and then divinity finishes the bridge. And it feels like they selected you all along. Because when you started the bridge, you didn't know where it was going yet, right? So that's what it feels like. You start to see their symbols all over in dreams, in prophecies, in divination, in the world. You see words jump out at you. Certain things appear. Their animal associates appear, right? Any thing that associates with them, you start to see their flowers, their animals, whatever is associated with them. And chaos just leads you to them. However, even though usually you feel like you're selected by your patrons, you can work with any deity at any time, for any reason, really, as long as the reason aligns with divinity and with the divine nature of that particular aspect of divinity. So you have to commune first. You have to know that energy well. You have to be empathic enough to be sure that you are reading that energy and not a projection of yourself onto it. You have to be sure it's safe and healthy first. So it's a little bit more involved to work with someone you're not familiar with. And that's why most people don't just work with random deities. They'll have one particular one they aspect and they work with the most often. They'll draw down the moon. They may not even call upon an aspect in their lunar rituals. That's far more common because it's just easier and safer. So to find your deities, though, to find the aspects that you work with the best, you have to just start and they'll come to you. So that can be a little riskier, but it's like how that there's no other way to get started. So you have to just do it. But if you start researching the deities and learning about their cultures and studying the languages and studying the history and the context, and you just learn about that deity and what they mean and what they have historically meant to people, what the energy is, then, even without communing with it yet, even with just learning about it, you may start to see symbols. You may start to see things in nature, or you may not, right? And then you'll be like, well, maybe I'll research something else for a while. And people will just go around and read different things and learn different things until they're starting to have those experiences that give them some window into objective truth and how they can make sense of that truth, right? And that's the whole point of it. So just start with that. Eventually you'll start communing with those energies. If they feel familiar, they feel right, you're like, yes, this really vibes with me. This person makes sense to me. I can understand this kind of divinity. Yeah, I like this. And then you commune with it, and you get to know it a little bit more. Maybe you do an invocation into your space. You do a prayer, some kind of formal ritual that involves doing that. And then you just wait some time and see if you have visions and start to have a relationship form with that deity. So that is how you would find your patron deities. And last here, I wanted to give you a list to get you started in your research. First of all, figure out what kind of deities do I need to work with. Am I a martial artist? Am I some kind of person that really likes to be working and getting things done? Then maybe I want to work with a battle deity or a hunt deity. Am I a person who's had a lot of trauma in the past or who tends to be vulnerable? Maybe I'll work with a protection deity. Am I someone who is drawn to chaos and grief and loss and is a medium? Okay, I'll work with, chthonic or chaos deities. Chthonic means underworld deities. Maybe you're just someone who likes love and life and you're just looking for a way to be more ordered and you don't really know what kind of deity you want to work with. Okay, we'll start with the communication and the transformation and the beauty deities. Look for a mother or a father archetype that suits you. And don't feel like you have to work with a mother because you're a woman or a father because you're a man. Sometimes it's really beneficial to a person to embody the opposite polarity in their life, and it doesn't have to be forever. You can have however many patrons, however many sexes or genders you want. Some of them are seen as being genderless even. So just, start working with the columns, the right 3 columns. If you're the kind of person who doesn't really know what you want and you just want more order in your life, read about some of those, see what names stand out to you, go read some of their literature and learn some of the language associated with that culture and read some history about them. Be authentic. Learn about them authentically and deeply and think about it. Don't just decide, oh, I really like the aesthetic of this deity. The way their picture looks is really cool. Or I watched some cartoon and this was the character and I just vibed with that character. Those are not good reasons to work with a certain deity. That will only result in disorder for you. Don't do that. Instead, just learn about them authentically and wait for the authentic experiences with that energy to come. If they come, if they don't, try someone else until you do have those experiences. It can help to look at the ones from your own heritage, but not always, because you've had past lives all over the world, all over the galaxy, the universe. Who knows where your past lives were lived? So some of these may not even vibe with you at all. And you could sit in a room and make up your entire pantheon for yourself, and you could understand divinity and objective truth that well on your own if you are disciplined enough, and come up with your own way of relating to divinity and write your own culture and your own literature and your own mythologies. And they would be no more or less valid than any of these. It would just be a little riskier because you're working with chaos and you're working with ego. Okay, so it can be risky, but that doesn't make them less valid. It just makes it more difficult to do it well. That's why many people start with existing archetypes, people that they can just turn to someone and say, oh, you work with this person. Is this how it's supposed to feel? Does this seem right to you? Am I doing this right? Using existing rituals as a way to make sure you're calling upon the right energies. So there's a lot of reasons why to get started. It's good to just work with one of these ones. Try different ones, but eventually, if you're solitary, if you're someone who's never really vibed and you just don't really get working with deities, maybe it's because you're meant to work with deities of your own invention. So think about that, okay? Because that's where like Cthulhu comes from and other deities that are used in the modern age that didn't really exist past a few hundred years. It happens. Someone invented this stuff the first time around, the archetypes, right? They're just embodiments of objective truth as we subjectively experience them. That's all an archetype of divinity is. As we evolve, for instance, we should see deities of the internet. Maybe the communication deities aren't enough. Maybe we need new ones that govern what it is to live in a world where you're always interconnected. So keep it in mind. Who knows what people will come up with to help us cope with the objective nature of this world we all share. So this time, it's the second half of chapter 7. Remember, I totally rewrote chapter 7 for the second edition. Breezed through it. It's not written very well, but it has all of the same content you see in this lecture. The questions are worth going through. Take a look at the exercises. This is the last chapter that's really on the guts of what it is to practice Wicca, to be a Wiccan witch. The next two, we're talking about the history of witchcraft and Wicca, how it came to be. We're talking about the classic authors, people that you should go and read when you're done with this course if you really want to be versed in Wiccan philosophy. And we're going to be talking about postmodern topics. It'll be light, it'll be fun to get through. And at this stage, you should be thinking about, okay, am I meant to be a Wiccan witch? Do I want to initiate? We have the Acolyte assessment on our website. I'll put a link in the description. If you're interested in joining our coven, you have to do this Acolyte assessment to demonstrate your skills, but it's not a test as much. There are some parts where they quiz you about our lineage information you can find on our website, but it's more like a worksheet. It's like, if you can do all the things on this Acolyte assessment, then you're an Acolyte. Like, this is what a first degree witch can do. If they go and study in a coven, I studied in enough covens and got so close to initiating in all of them. So that's how I know what it takes and how to create an assessment that is for any discipline, not even just witches. So that's the Acolyte assessment. Just prove your spiritual intelligence, basically, and it's worth doing it for yourself. Even if you have no intention to send it in. If you do send it in and you initiate with us and you certify that you're initiated with us through that assessment, we give out cords. We do initiations around Samhain. All of it's remote for now, membership. It's all free membership. We're happy to accept new members into our coven. Just come join our server, get to know us, work on the assessment, work on your skills. And we accept leaders straight out the bat. So if you're watching this to formalize your knowledge, or because you plan on teaching your own courses, but you want to be a part of a lineage, you should reach out to us as well, because you could just do the Acolyte and the leader assessment together and then initiate as a leader come Samhain. So now is the time to reach out to me. covenantoftheopenmind@gmail.com, ladytehila@gmail.com. Join our Discord server. The links are all in the description. Now is the time. If you want to join our group, we do initiations at Samhain, dedications. We've done some already, but we'll do some more here in September in preparation for initiations at Samhain. So if you want to be involved with us, now's the time. You do not have to do the assessment or submit it or do any of that to consider yourself an open-minded witch. We are an open-minded, a universalist tradition, an open tradition. You could go through this course and just say, well, I'm Wiccan, but I don't really want to join a coven. So if someone asks what kind of Wiccan you are, Alexandrian, Gardnerian, whatever, we're going to go over that in the postmodern topics, all the different lineages that there are that you might be interested in joining. But you could just say, I'm open-minded Wiccan, right? That's the point of our lineage, so that you don't have to pick traditions from one or the other or be a strict type of witch. You could just live a Wiccan lifestyle without all of the drama. And that's what our group is for. So I talk more about that in the coming lectures, but I wanted to just touch on it now so you're all thinking ahead, because it's going to be fall before you know it. I hope you guys are having a wonderful summer, that you enjoy the sun moving into Leo and the start of fall. And once we hit that Virgo shift, we'll be talking history from our new covenstead in West Virginia. We'll be talking history. We'll be learning where witchcraft comes from. We'll be learning how to be witches in the modern age, all that good stuff. So I look forward to that. And from everyone here at the Coven of the Open Mind, blessed be